I want to talk a little bit more about Alone in the Dark because there is so much to dive into, right? I mean, first and foremost, when this game was announced, I was really looking forward to it. Alone in the Dark is a franchise that has super deep roots in the horror genre. I mean, it's like one of the first survival horror games, so it is significant. It is the cart before the horse. It was before Resident Evil. So I always just couldn't help but find myself rooting for it, right? I mean, the series has had a lot of ups and downs, but I was looking at this one to hopefully usher in a new generation. They've made their mistakes. There's so much potential there, and ultimately, I don't think it hit that potential. So what I do in these videos, if you are new here, is I do the before you buy video on game ranks. I do the big, more in-depth review, and then over here, I just kind of turn the camera on and talk because there's usually more to dive into or more feelings, or I like to highlight some things I like about a game, even if I don't like it. And with Alone in the Dark, it's a lot of things because I was pretty hard on this one. And I said this in the video, but like I also was hard on Callisto Protocol. I do like these like third person action adventure horror adventures, specifically really so with Alone in the Dark because it was billed as like a new survival horror game. So I really like those types of games and I really expect a lot out of them, and it just fell flat for me. I was disappointed. Is it a disaster? Absolutely not. And this is where I kind of wanted to go on record and say before it releases that I do think, even though I was a little harsh on it, look at reviews. They're all over the place. I saw some 7 out of 10s. I've seen some worse scores. I've seen some higher scores. You have to read and watch multiple reviews, right? Like this is why when people are like, Jake, you're the only person I watch, I like really appreciate that, dude. That is really nice. But like, I think you should seek out other voices or opinions or none and just go in blind. Because, like I said, I'm going on record now because I do think this one is still going to find an audience. There is something to it that is unique and is special, and I liked a lot of those elements, but it wasn't enough to save the overall experience for me. There are 2 campaigns, you play as the 2 characters, and when I played through those 2 campaigns, I ended just kind of going, what the hell is that? Like, that felt like a little bit of a waste of time. You know? So ultimately, I go on that feeling. There's a bunch of things I can nitpick. The combat isn't that great. The gunshots are really punchy. There's some stuff there, but the enemies and the combat itself, it's just extremely, extremely lame in my opinion. And then in terms of it being a survival horror game, there's not really too much inventory management or worrying about resource. I mean, you are worrying about resources because it can be pretty challenging, but it just doesn't feel it feels like very, very toned down. And then the story ultimately falls flat. It feels like it has a lot of big ideas, but it felt like it didn't have enough time, and the way it was kind of put together felt a little jumbled, messy, and things just kind of happen, and it was weird. And that, I think, is a more glaring disappointment, specifically because, dude, there is some cool shit here. There is some kind of high fantasy, like weird mystical horror stuff. There's a lot of, cerebral horror. And then there's just spooky classic horror where you're walking around a haunted mansion. Hey, now before we keep going, I just want to talk about the sponsor for today's video. It's Vessi. Now, if you're new to our videos, Vessi is the dependable, waterproof, comfortable shoe we've been recommending for a long time now. And it's significant right now because the seasons are changing. It's just about springtime here in New York, and that means wet and rainy weather. If you're looking for something casual, something smart, they got you. But today we're talking about the Stormburst High Top. These bad boys are interesting. I've been rocking a pair for a while. They're a little dirty because I've been beating the hell out of them like every day. But these are really suited for adventures wherever you go because the bottoms are much more grippy. Say you go on a hike or something like that. They're also still easy to slip on and off because they almost have a sock-like thing around the top, nice and stretchy, but they're super comfortable and supportive. So if you're running, climbing, walking, doing whatever, they got you covered. But thankfully, they're still waterproof like all of Vessi's kicks, so they keep your feet cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And it doesn't feel like a waterproof shoe or like a gimmick. It's just a legitimately good shoe. And when you do have a waterproof shoe, it does make you feel a little bit more adventurous. You might, venture out a little bit more. Me personally, I just like when I'm out with other people and I just step right through puddles and people are like, oh no, look out. And I'm like, nah, I'm good. So this rainy spring, you don't want to be stuck inside. Let Vessi help out with that. All you got to do is click the link in the description down below or head to vessi.com/onjake and you'll get 15% off your first order automatically at checkout. Step in style, rain or shine. Once again, that's vessi.com/onjake, and big thanks to Vessi for sponsoring this video. Now back to the show. Now, I won't spoil anything in this video, but there are some decisions made with the gameplay structure of that mansion that I was actually a little disappointed in. I can't really talk about that without spoiling the game, but what I can say is that the mansion itself, Derceto Mansion, is really good. It's a great callback to the original Alone in the Dark game. It's steeped in green. It has that Louisiana old plantation southern gothic feel to it, which really helps this game, and really the series, or the early games at least, have somewhat of a different horror identity, right? I mean, that's just an interesting standout thing that at least you don't see in other video games. And this mansion is so like lovingly detailed, where it kind of makes sense. It's clearly put together by an eccentric, but there are rooms that people live in. They are all different. They are detailed, and just kind of going through that really worked for me. Like, that was like one of my favorite parts of the game. The atmosphere, the vibe, the tone, playing through for the first time and playing it really slowly and not knowing what was coming next, and slowly walking around with a flashlight, like that works. It's once the game starts to reveal all of its pieces, all of its cards, then that kind of fizzles out. But it also does a really good job of taking advantage of jump scares that don't feel like bullshit, like jump scares that are actually good. And also, from a technological standpoint, like, yes, the game is very detailed. Graphically, it's pretty decent in spots, but it also does like that fast loading time environment change thing. And it uses that in really good ways, really effective ways. And again, without spoiling anything, it's tough, but there are things with this game that almost work. And again, like to repeat myself from the Game Ranks video, like there is this noir, like 1930s, or like technically it's like the very late 1920s, but it's like got this very smooth jazz, like lounge jazz thing to it. The game really leans into that in a lot of spots, and it makes it feel like a very different thing when you juxtapose that with like the gothic horror mansion and some of the weirder, more mystical elements of the horror. So in this video, yes, I am focusing more on the good, but ultimately it was a game that disappointed me because I played through it and it just really didn't feel like it was totally worth the ride. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the endings and the last boss and how it all just kind of felt rushed. Resident Evil games have made the same mistake, but I don't know. There's something about it with this that just, it didn't really quite sit right with me. And I think a lot of that disappointment is just around the missed potential. And again, this is why I kind of preface this with like, read reviews. I think people are still going to like this. It might just be me. I might just be hard on this game because I expected so much, but like, I want to be wrong. I want people to enjoy this game more than me, maybe. Like, maybe I was wrong and maybe they make another one and it's even better, because I just want this franchise to be a thing again, dude. It can't just be Resident Evil or like, I don't even know what else, but Alone in the Dark was like a brand for a while. It's got an iconic name. They made like shitty movies at a point. But like for me, it was initially how I was exposed to it was Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare. Now, for a lot of people, that was their entry point because that was a big deal. The marketing, I remember like the box art, everything about it, seeing it in magazine ads, it was just so mysterious and so cool with the guy standing in front of the gate. And the game delivered. You know, obviously it definitely has its problems, but there, you know, then from there, as a teenager, I went back and very properly downloaded the original game and exposed myself to that. And it is old. It is goofy, but it is so charming, and it's great to see just how that style of game, that genre, evolves from that. It just seems so humble and quaint in its presentation, and its goofy looks, and the graphics, and how Edward Carnby just looks like a freaking clown. I love it. There's something really charming to that. And that lo-fi, old, polygonal, early 3D graphics and minimal sound just kind of makes it all the more eerie. But again, the series has had ups and downs. I think 2008, that new Alone in the Dark revival game, is the one that kind of did it in. That one does have its fans and its defenders, but that was one I was really looking forward to, and it kind of felt like this weird piece of crap that wasn't really like a horror game, so to speak. It was such a bizarre thing. I was so excited for it leading up to it. I had a t-shirt with the game's logo. Like, I don't know, I got it as like a pre-order bonus or something. I don't know, but I was so looking forward to it, and the graphics and the story presentation, and James McCaffrey, voice of Max Payne, was voicing the main character in this. There was a lot going for it. They clearly like put a ton into marketing and the budget, and it totally fell flat. It didn't get great reviews. I don't know how much it sold, but that was really it for the franchise. The name has popped up here and there in various projects, but this was supposed to be the next big thing. And with them getting star power behind it, that's when I was really interested. You know, you have Jodie Comer. I really liked her in The Last Duel. And then you have David Harbour, someone who, I like him as Hopper in Stranger Things and all that. But like, I always thought like there's more to him. Like I want to see him used in better projects. They tried to make him Hellboy. That was weird. He just seems like an odd guy, and he has been on record as like being a capital G gamer. So like I thought this made sense, and I was curious to see how it would go down. But ultimately, I don't think he brought, or either of them really brought too much to the game. They are characters where like stuff is just kind of happening to them. You know, there are moments where they do react and they are confused, and there's kind of like a what's in your head, what's not. But ultimately, they both were just very flat and stilted. And I guess that comes down to the direction. And I think that boils down to also just how the game and the story is presented, and how, like I said, characters just come and go. They say things. You just kind of go through the motions and then it ends. And what I wanted to come here and nail down even further is like the fact that I was disappointed by it, wasn't the biggest fan of it. A lot of it comes down to it being like brutally short, like a 10-hour thing, 10, 11, 12 hours if you play both campaigns, which survival horror games are at points. But with this one being so rough around the edges, and then it feeling so short and kind of rushed, and then it being pretty much a full price game, that makes it a really tough sell. But what I will say is that I personally know in my life, and you probably do too, or maybe you are a horror fan who is forgiving of stuff. I know horror fans that will sit through a bunch of bullshit and still love it, or know that something is terrible and still have a great time with it. So this is again where I come back to, I'm okay with being wrong here. This doesn't get like a 2 out of 10 for me. Like I don't do review scale numbers, but I rate it on a play it at some point at your budget if you're interested in these types of things. Like if you are willing to forgive flaws and see the glimmers of potential that this game really had, some of the creative moments, some of the weirder levels, some of the level design is absolutely gorgeous. And I think people should see it if they like horror tropes, horror stuff. But if you're really picky and you find yourself watching a lot of YouTube videos and just complaining about every game, I don't know if this one is going to be for you. But if you can overlook a lot of flaws and you love horror and maybe are just super like me, kind of invested in Alone in the Dark coming back and have some interest in the old games, that's when I would say consider it at some point. Like, I don't know, like I wouldn't bump it off of your list if you're in the middle of Final Fantasy or like Dragon's Dogma 2 or whatever. But basically what I just did, and this pisses people off, but like I like having the nuanced conversation of talking about a game that I ultimately thought was mid or whatever, and I kind of ended up still convincing some of you guys out there to play it. But that's the key thing. Some of you. I could also get into how it does also feel kind of old school. It does feel like a weird, like, you know, mid-budget PS3 game or Xbox 360 game, but I don't have time for that. I think I've talked your ear off enough. Got a lot of other videos in the works. Obviously, March has been a pretty busy month for games and stuff. So yeah, thanks for hearing me out on this one. Thanks again to the sponsor of this video. Thank you guys for watching this and listening to me ramble and yap about a game I didn't even really totally love. I'm just here to talk about this stuff. It's interesting, and that's what we do. So if you get it and you like it, clicking the like button helps me. Thank you. But that's it. I'm going to go back to work. I'm Jake Baldino. Subscribe because video games. Pizza's on me.